I admit that I'm not the sharpest, smartest knife in the drawer, and it won't do you any good to keep repeating that. It may have taken me a few years to realize this, and now that I know what was going on behind my back, I'll need help figuring out what to do next. Of course, I still love that bitch, but I don't like her at all anymore. What about children? What should I do with these two? When I think about my kids, the bile in my stomach starts to rise and I have to run to the bathroom to throw up $30 worth of Jack Daniels. I finish puking and go to the sink to rinse my mouth and wash my face before heading back to the bar and ordering another double. Now, I'll have to start over if I'm going to get drunk, but I should probably stay sober for a while. When the bartender returns with my double drink, I ask for a pad and pen to start my list. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Simon Messina, and I have been married to Janice for the last 9 years. Janice and I first met a little over 10 years ago when I was injured at work. I cut my hand with a chisel and had to get stitches to stop the bleeding, and Janice was working as a nurse in the emergency room. She was very professional, although I tried my best but could not get her to see me as more than a patient. She was a beauty. Long dark hair in a ponytail, 170 centimeters tall, long legs, athletic build, good-sized breasts, and ass. I looked into her brown eyes as she intently gave me a shot of Novocaine to numb the pain before I got stitches. Isn't it funny how once you notice a person, you start seeing them more often? Something like when you decide to buy a certain type of car and then you start seeing that car everywhere you go. Well, that's what happened with Janice. I started seeing her around town, usually with some guy, and they seemed happy together. One evening, they were at a tavern that I frequented. I watched as Janice and her boyfriend started making a little noise, and then the guy got up and walked away. Janice stayed at the table with her friends, looking angry. I turned away before she noticed me, but tried my best to listen, which wasn't that hard because Janice was a little drunk and making noise. The gist of her tirade was, "He's a jealous jerk, and I'm starting to get tired of it." I decided to leave before my eavesdropping became obvious. It was probably 2 weeks before I saw her at a bar again, this time with some friends and no boyfriend. The band started playing a song I could dance to and I walked over to their table. "I don't know if you remember me from the emergency room a couple of months ago. My name is Simon and I was wondering if you would like to dance?" She looked at me for a second before answering, "Yes, the guy with the cut hand. Sure, let's dance." My life with Janice began at that moment, and I thought I was the luckiest man in the world. We dated for a month before any intimacy developed between us. She seemed in no hurry, and I didn't insist. The first time we made love was something out of a romance novel. We had dinner at an Italian restaurant where there was excellent pasta, 2 bottles of excellent red wine, and tiramisu for dessert. It was not my intention to get Janice drunk, but deep down, I hoped to loosen her inhibitions a little. We returned to my apartment, and before the door even closed, Janice was in my arms, planting the hottest kiss on my lips. I had probably slept with 10 women up to this point, but nothing prepared me for that night. Janice was fireworks. Our tongues played with each other as our hands wandered. I unbuttoned her blouse, unclasped her bra, and played with the most beautiful breasts imaginable. When I squeezed her buds in the center of her chest, she let out a moan. After playing with them for a few minutes, I put my hand under her skirt. "Simon, let's go to bed." I picked Janice up by her buttocks, literally because she was wearing a thong, and carried her to my bed. The rest of our clothes quickly ended up on the floor. For the next 3 hours, we couldn't get enough of each other. It was wonderful. The best thing was that Janice was very vocal about the things that gave her pleasure. I've had women who cried out to Jesus and women who didn't make a sound. What is it about women that they can't help you please them? I do not understand this. I don't order food for them when we go to a restaurant, and I don't choose a TV show or movie without asking their opinion. So what makes a woman think that I know how to satisfy her when we're in bed? I mean, give us men a hint as to what you like and how you like it. And that's what Janice did. She gave me clues. That night and every night I needed them. It made me feel like the #1 stallion. Not only that, but because Janice was so willing to share, I felt like I could do the same. You get the picture. The sex was great. I didn't care where Janice developed her talents, in the bedroom, or in any other room we christened over the next few months, as long as she was now exclusively mine. Everything pointed to the fact that she was mine. She never gave me a reason to doubt her. 4 months after that first night, I took Janice to dance at the tavern where we first danced together and asked her to marry me. She said yes, and we set a date for the first Saturday in June. About 2 months after our engagement, I was sitting in the same tavern with a good friend when Janice's ex-boyfriend walked past our table on his way out. He stopped and looked at me. "You are Janice's fiancé, aren't you?" "Yes." "I hope we don't get into trouble because she and I didn't start dating until you two had been separated for a few weeks." "No, we had our reasons for breaking up, or at least I had my reasons. I just wish you all the best if you two get married, especially considering its features when it comes to exclusivity." With these words, he walked out the door. I decided it was just a bitter sob and shook my head. There are a few more things about my past life that you need to know because they will become important later. First of all, in my youth, I was a very good wrestler. In high school, I wrestled for 4 years and was given a scholarship to a state university. Until the last course, everything was going great for me. I was wrestling our opponent's guy at the state meet and was leading him on points when the light went out in my head. It turns out that this asshole was so angry about losing to me that he kneed me in the reproductive organs. I spent the next 2 days in the hospital. When I recovered, I dropped out for the rest of the season, lost all interest in school, and ended up dropping out of college and taking a job with a local builder. In case you were wondering, another wrestler ended up getting kicked off the team and lost his scholarship. I was asked if I wanted to press assault charges, but I didn't put it all behind me. Second, my father died when I was 12 years old, and my mother died 10 years later. Since I had no brothers or sisters and my parents were not close to their extended families, this left a huge hole in my heart until many years later when I met Penny, Janice's mother, and became attached to her as a surrogate parent. Janice's father left the family when Janice was still a teenager, so there were only 3 of us. Janice sent her father birthday and Christmas cards every year, but never heard back from him. He did not attend our wedding and did not even send a note in response to our invitation. Her mother took her to the altar and married her off. I make my living as a carpenter specializing in restoration work. I'm one of the best on the West Coast, and most of my work involves restoring old mansions that were bought by rich people with too much money. Since I can charge between $75 and $100 an hour, I make about $150K a year. Not bad for a not-so-talented college dropout. Unfortunately, this means I need to travel and spend 1 or 2 weeks away from home every month. The hard thing about working for rich people is that they can either treat you like a commoner or like an invisible man. For example, I worked for a 20-year-old actress in Los Angeles. She had just bought this 1,000-square-meter house and spent another couple of million on its restoration. More than once, she hung out by the pool completely naked while I worked inside. She didn't try to seduce me. She just treated me like I was invisible. Another time, I was working on a house in Beverly Hills and something similar happened. Only this time, I watched the lady of the house having sex with a boy by the pool in broad daylight. They did this on a sun lounger. I sat in the kitchen and watched as this Latina with a big tool fucked her in 3 different positions. What really pissed me off was that I liked her husband. He was the kind of guy who talked to me as an equal. Here's this rich Hollywood producer. He comes home from work, opens 2 beers, and asks me how my day was and how work is going, offering me 1 beer. And I really liked him because his fridge was full of domestic long-neck beer, not this shitty imported crap that we drank straight from the bottles. I felt bad that his old lady was cheating on him while he was at work, but I didn't say anything in case it was their deal. You know, one of those open prenuptial agreements or something. And I didn't want to look him in the eye when I spoke, in case it wasn't an arrangement he was okay with. Your wife is cheating on you with a billiard player. And I watched the guy collapse. So I took the coward's route and anonymously called his office after finishing work and receiving my check. I tried to disguise my voice as best I could and told him the news. He thanked me, and 2 weeks later I read that he was getting a divorce. I guess that wasn't their agreement after all. Anyway, back to my current problem. Janice and I have 2 children. Okay, This is the part where you realize how damn stupid I can be, but before you judge me too harshly, please remember that when my first child was born, Janice and her mother were my universe. It was 3 years after the wedding when Janice told me she was pregnant. I was taller than a kite. Finally, I will have a family. I spent weeks getting the nursery organized, all oak molding and fancy trim on the windows and doors. It was wonderful. On Jacob's birthday, I got a call at work that Penny was taking Janice to the hospital. Her water broke and it was time. I specifically made sure that I only had local work scheduled for the month before and after my due date, so I was actually in the hospital and in the delivery room within half an hour of Penny's call. Janice was prepared and ready to give birth. I replayed all the Lamaze lessons in my head, preparing to prepare her for this blessed event. 3 hours later, the doctor said, "Here we are?" And little Jacob emerged from it. I know many new fathers can hyperventilate, feel dizzy, some even pass out from the ordeal, but that doesn't even come close to describing how I felt when the nurse handed Jacob to me and asked me to hand him over to his mother. I had to quickly pass it to avoid dropping it because Jacob looked like he was at least partially black. Janice and Penny looked at Jacob at the same time, then at me, before Penny said, "We need to talk." Penny led me out of the maternity ward and told me why my son looked the way he did. "Simon, I'm sorry we hid this from you, but now you need to know the truth. My father was mixed race. His mother was black and his father white. We should have told you this before you married Janice, but we were worried that you might not marry her knowing that she is part black. That doesn't make any sense, Penny. Why should this matter to me? What made you think that? Well, because you told us that the guy who ended your college wrestling career was black. Yes, but I never attached much importance to his skin color. I was just telling you both what happened and who did it. You have never heard a single racist word come out of my mouth. Well, that's good, Simon, because your son will need your complete love and acceptance for who he is. Janice and I never told you about my brother who lives in Denver. Penny reached into her wallet and pulled out a photo of a man, a black man. This is my brother Henry. He's a couple years younger than me, and it was always a problem when our family went out in public because he was so dark and I was white. You can't believe how rude people can be, staring at us or even coming up to us and asking personal questions. My mom and dad eventually moved to San Francisco because it was more tolerant there in the 60s. I listened to Penny's story and it seemed reasonable enough. Plus, I didn't want to be one of those rude, bigoted people she was talking about, so I left it at that. I finally got the chance to meet Penny's brother the first Christmas after Jacob was born. Janice introduced him to me as Uncle Henry. Henry mentioned that he was leaving Denver and moving back to Portland to be closer to family. A month later, Henry moved into Penny's house. After that, Uncle Henry visited us every few weeks because he took an active interest in Jacob. At the same time, I watched Penny and her brother several times, which made me feel uncomfortable. They never crossed the line into a relationship, but they seemed awfully close for siblings. I'll admit, one day when we were at Penny's house for a barbecue and everyone else was in the backyard, I took the opportunity to look into the bedrooms. After spending a minute in Penny's room and then Henry's, I relaxed because it turned out that they each had their own separate rooms. But appearances can be deceiving. After the birth of my second child, a girl we named after my mother, Ginny, I decided that a family of 4 was the right size. We had 2 healthy children, a boy and a girl. Who could ask for more? I discussed this with Janice, and she agreed that we could stop having children and focus on raising the 2 wonderful children we had. When I suggested a vasectomy, Janice insisted on getting an IUD instead. So we could always change our minds in the future. That's what we did. After 2 wonderful years of married life, I was working on a restoration project for a lovely middle-aged lady and her husband. Sharon and Tim were both OB-GYNs. One afternoon, the 3 of us were discussing things that I would only be comfortable discussing with doctors. I told Sharon that Janice had been using an IUD for the past 2 years, and she suggested an alternative because an IUD can sometimes cause problems for a woman if used for too long. Her suggestion was that I go ahead and have a vasectomy, but freeze my semen just in case. I loved the idea and decided that I would surprise Janice with my vasectomy for Valentine's Day. Well, not the most romantic gift, but it's better than a washing machine or vacuum cleaner. My doctor gave me a recommendation for a clinic that could save my sperm and perform a vasectomy. The doctor at the clinic told me it would take several visits to collect the semen, so I made an appointment for the next 3 Fridays. It was quite strange to walk into the small room they had set up for the gathering. They actually have adult movies there to get you pumped up before the show. I read some pretty crazy stories in Penthouse magazine. I didn't really like the stories where some guy's wife drove the train while the husband watched, and there were others where the wife wanted a big black instrument. That didn't sit well with me either. I loved the story where the wife brought her best friend home, and the 2 women gave her husband the night of his life. I managed to fill my cup all the way, so I still don't know if the threesome was a one-time thing or not. I gave the nurse my sample and told her I would be back next week. She was a beautiful woman, and I admit that I went to bed that night thinking about the nurse and Janice and I having a threesome. I woke up super excited and spent the early Saturday morning having sex with my wife. Just like every time we had sex, Janice made me feel like a stallion from Mount Olympus. I received a call on Tuesday morning, and the doctor asked if I could come in that afternoon or the next day. I asked if we could discuss this over the phone, and he said it would be better to talk in person. I said I would be there in the afternoon, but in the meantime, I thought they had found some type of cancer or something like that in my semen. My father died when he was 34, so I've been waiting for something like this most of my life. I went to the clinic trying to think about how I was going to take care of my family's well-being. The doctor greeted me with a handshake and immediately got down to business. Have you ever had an injury to your reproductive organs? When I was struggling, the guy kicked me and they swollen so much that I ended up in the hospital for a while, I answered. Well, it's more than likely that it caused your fertility problems. Your sperm count is so low that it is extremely unlikely that you could father any children unless it was done in vitro. But doc, this is impossible. I have 2 children at home. He looked at me with pity in his eyes, and that's when the full force of the lie that was my marriage and my life hit me like a ton of bricks. Needless to say, I canceled the rest of my appointments and my vasectomy. I walked out of the clinic like a zombie from The Walking Dead. I had to figure out some way to find out the truth about my life without telling Janice. I spent the rest of the day sitting at the bar across the street from the clinic with the bartender's notebook and pen. Someone once told me that the best way to get something done is to make a list of what you need to do. That's where I started. I finished my double Jack Daniels and reread my list. Act natural. Check on the kids. Call Fred. Open a personal current account. Talk to her father. Protect assets. Get tested for sexually transmitted diseases. Find housing. Find out why. Otum sti. I double-space each item in case I missed something and had to add it after talking to Fred, a friend of mine who just went through a divorce. The next day, I woke up with a bad headache and started working on the list. Janice told me all sorts of bullshit about me coming home drunk last night, and I tried my best to pretend nothing happened. I lied to Janice for the first time that day, saying that Fred was in a sad mood and that we got drunk together. I spent that evening before and after dinner in the garage repairing my work tools. When I arrived for dinner, I complimented Janice on her food, asked Jacob about his day at daycare, and made eyes at my 2-year-old daughter. The hardest part was later, when it was time to go to bed. I resigned myself to crawling into bed with Janice, kissing her goodnight and pretending to fall asleep. I took swabs of the children's saliva and one of my own. I gave samples to the clinic. Next was a visit to the bank to open my personal checking account. I called Janice to tell her that I had urgent repairs for an important client in Los Angeles and that I would be gone for 2 or 3 days. Instead, I booked a plane ticket to the Keys to meet my father-in-law, whom I had never met before. I realized that for the first time in my life, a lie was coming out of my mouth. I can't say that the deceit was pleasant, but now it seemed necessary. I called my buddy Fred from the airport while waiting for my flight. I needed his support if my own marriage went down the same path. Fred was at work and couldn't really get into it, so we planned to meet when I got back from Florida. He swore to secrecy regarding our conversation. Larry Adonios operated a charter fishing boat out of Key Largo. He was surprised by my phone call, but didn't seem surprised when I asked him if we could meet to talk. He allocated the afternoon for us based on my expected arrival. I flew to Miami, rented a car and a hotel room to spend the night, and the next day, I went to see him at the marina. Larry pulled his boat up to the dock at exactly noon. 2 of his clients got off the boat, each with a bunch of fish. Larry was a nice man, 180 centimeters tall, slender, with a shock of gray hair and the deep tan of a Greek fisherman. He looked around before he recognized me. Janice must have sent him our Christmas card with the family photo. He came over and extended his hand to shake mine. "Nice to meet you, Simon. I'm guessing this is not a pleasant visit." He's not one to mince words. I briefly explained to him why I was there. "Wait a minute, Penny told you that Henry was her brother?" Larry asked a question and could hardly contain the smile on his face. "He is not her brother, but her on-again, off-again lover, and the reason we are not married. Everyone thinks I was a big asshole for abandoning my family, but let me tell you why I'm here in Key Largo." Larry told me his sad story. Janice started playing basketball in elementary school, and by the time she reached high school, she was good enough to make the AAU traveling team. It was a little difficult for us financially because I insisted that her mother travel with her and act as a companion. We thought it would be worth it if Janice could get a college scholarship. So I stayed home and worked overtime while Janice and Penny spent at least 2 weekends a month away from home. I wasn't really worried about Penny leaving because I had a good relationship with Janice, and I assumed she would keep an eye and let me know if her mom started showing interest in one of the dads. And in the first year, I think everything was fine, but in the second year, everything went wrong. Elite teams of boys and girls began traveling together more often, sometimes even twice a month. Janice showed interest in one of the boys on their elite team. His name is Henry Bishop, but everyone calls him Junior, so he won't be confused with his father, Henry Bishop Sr. Do you see where this is going, Simon? Henry Sr. was traveling with a team of boys as a chaperone, and it seemed that the Adonios women felt a mutual attraction to the Bishop men. There were white women in the Bishop family. It turned out that Bishop Sr.'s mother was white, just like Bishop Jr.'s. Eventually, I found out that every night during the travels, the younger one would look into Janice's room, while Penny slept in the older one's room. A pretty sweet arrangement until one of the other parents took pity and warned me. I hired a private detective and made inquiries about them the next time they left town. By the time they returned, I had been moved into a spare bedroom, and Penny had been given the papers that week. Penny did everything she could to convince me that it only happened twice, which turned out to be a lie, and I went for divorce. What really burned me the most was Janice's betrayal. I thought we had a good relationship, but obviously it was more important to have sex with my boyfriend. So I left Oregon, moved here, and never looked back. I was probably looking at Larry with dazed, glassy eyes, trying to understand how I ended up in such a den of vipers. He looked at me and almost ruthlessly continued his story. "When I saw a Christmas card with a photo of your family and 2 children who didn't look like you, I made a couple of calls to my friends in the West. They did some digging for me and told me what they found out. Sorry to break the news to you, Simon, but it's likely that your 2 children are Henry Jr.'s. I don't understand, Larry. If she's messing with that asshole Henry, why didn't she just marry him? Why did you marry me and not him?" "Because, dear boy, both Henrys have a bad habit of screwing up and ending up in jail." The first time, Henry Jr. was caught selling a crap load of drugs to an undercover cop. He was 20 years old and a sophomore in college, playing basketball. But the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Just like Henry Sr., Jr. needed more. More money, cars, women, whatever. He ended up serving 7 years because he didn't cooperate and was carrying an illegal automatic weapon when he was arrested. My sources have learned that he was released from prison about a year before your son was born. He screwed up before Jacob was born, served a second sentence on an assault charge, and went back to prison for 18 months. Came out probably just in time for Janice to get pregnant with your little girl. I probably could have intervened after I found out what was going on, but I decided to stay out of it. After all, I didn't know you, and it didn't seem to be any of my business. I just thought you didn't mind what was going on. No, that's not true at all. I can't believe what an idiot I've been for the last 4 years. How could I be so stupid? You're not stupid, Simon. You were just in love, and my ex-wife used it against you. From what I understand, you are a damn good carpenter with a successful business. This requires brains. Let me tell you what I've learned over all these years of taking so-called smart people fishing on my boat. Most of them know 1 or 2 things pretty well, and that's it. They use this knowledge as a shield. My ex and daughter used your dependence on them as family and your trusting nature against you. Besides, the expert lied to you. Let me explain this. Like I said, Penny swore she only slept with Henry twice. I didn't believe her, so she said she'd take a lie detector test. The damn bitch passed the test. The woman conducting the test asked this question several times, and the results were the same. Penny was telling the truth. But something didn't seem right, so I asked Janice to take a lie detector test. Penny was furious, calling me an asshole for putting my daughter through such an ordeal. Janice apparently didn't have Penny's skills, at least not yet, and when she took the test, it turned out that 2 couples had been doing it for 5 months. Let it serve as a lesson if the 2 of them offer to take a test to make sure they're telling you the truth. I thanked Larry for the information. He offered to buy me drinks and dinner, but I refused. It's time to return home and plan your next steps. I boarded an overnight flight to Portland and spent Wednesday working on my plans. The list I compiled 2 days ago has expanded to include hire a lawyer, get evidence. Fred met me for dinner that night and gave me some great advice. He told me not to hire his lawyer, but to use the same attack dog lawyer his wife used. We drank and commiserate for a few hours, and he let me spend the night at his house. 1 less night of hassling with Janice. On Thursday, I made an appointment with a lawyer, transferred some money, arranged an out-of-town job for the next week, and bought 2 voice-activated voice recorders. I didn't really need the video. Besides, I didn't think I could stand watching some weird guy have sex with my wife, and listening would be bad enough. If I saw them doing this, I just might end up in jail. On Thursday evening, I returned home from my fake emergency business trip. Janice didn't think twice when I made up a story about a famous reality TV star I'd met. Everything I said was based on an article from People magazine purchased at the Miami airport. Lying was becoming too easy for me, but it was still not fun. Janice wasn't upset when I told her I'd be in Seattle all next week doing work for some millionaire at Microsoft, which was a real job. When she went to bed, I hid the recorder in the kitchen. The next day, I found a better spot in the bedroom. I tested both units and loaded my tools into the truck for the trip north. I immersed myself in my work. The Seattle clients turned out to be one of those wonderful couples with a great sense of design and an unlimited budget. I couldn't have chosen a better way to spend this otherwise shitty week. I arrived home on Sunday evening and had to wait until Monday morning to listen to the tapes. It was bittersweet to listen to. Bitter because, as I expected, Janice and her boyfriend spent a week having sex in the bedroom. Sweet because I overheard Junior having a one-sided conversation with someone else. This happened after Janice got into the shower. This is what the recorder recorded. Hey bro, are you ready for this? I just scored a great score. Janice was at the clinic, and this elderly couple came in all excited to get their shots because they would be spending the next month in Israel. Janice got them talking and fed me enough to know it was going to be a cakewalk. She looked up the couple's address, and it turned out to be in a good area of town. If you're home, let me know. Tomorrow, I will inspect this place. They are leaving next month. Whoever Junior was talking to must have agreed because the rest of the conversation was the 2 of them making plans to rob the house when the elderly couple left the country. My problem was whether I would turn Janice in when I turned Junior over to the cops. It would have been fair for her to spend a few years in prison, but I wasn't going to play babysitter for a couple of kids that weren't mine. Both parents fed them 3 times a day, then they watched TV all day. Okay, when I read stories about cuckold husbands, they always say that even if the children are not their biological children, he still loves them, blah, blah, blah. Maybe my resentment was still too strong, but both of Janice's children, and that's how I thought about them right now, could go to prison with Janice. I don't care about that. Chances are that this lying bitch, my mother-in-law, may spend her golden years raising the offspring of her deception. I spent the next month trying to be polite and tiptoe around Janice as best I could. The tape recorders remained on, and I was out of town for work for most of those weeks. Junior didn't pay attention to the fact that he was being recorded. He continued to talk to his accomplice, and I had enough information to know when their big heist would take place. I was supposedly out of town the night of the break-in, but instead, I was sitting in a rental car down the street from my house. I followed the dumbass to the old couple's house and waited while Junior and his friend broke into the place. I called the police from my unregistered hot phone and pretended to be a concerned neighbor. Officer, my neighbors are out of the country and I just saw 2 men loading their van with items from the house. It is a dark brown van with the following license plate. The van had just pulled out of the driveway and was headed south on Hiawatha Drive. I followed him and watched from 2 blocks away as 3 patrol cars surrounded the van and laughed as the 2 criminals were led away in handcuffs. I should be ashamed of what I'm going to tell you next, but somehow I'm not ashamed. The night before the robbery, I drove a rental car to my neighborhood. It was the middle of the night and dark when I slipped the oilcloth-wrapped pistol, with my fingerprints erased, under the driver's seat of Henry's van. I won't tell you where I got this gun from. Let's just say a good friend gave it to me, and I removed the serial number so it couldn't be traced. You see, Henry, being a felon, actually twice convicted, has no right to have a firearm on his person. And since this would be his 3rd offense in a state with a 3 strikes and you're out free justice system, it would be decades before Henry was released from prison, if at all. I wasn't too worried about the gun being planted because Henry was robbing some poor couple's house. The gun was just insurance. Henry couldn't plead a misdemeanor. The first phase of my revenge was completed. When I returned home the next day, Janice was in the office, her eyes wide. Her mom sat with her on the couch, holding Janice. Uncle Henry was in my lazy boy opposite them. They all looked as if death had arrived. What happened, Janice? Why the tears? Oh, Simon, I just found out that a very old friend of mine is dying of cancer. And it's so terrible. Mom and Uncle Henry came to help me because I didn't know when you'd be home. As the words left her lips, I realized that Janice had learned lessons in lying from her mother. It also became clear to me that one of my find out why questions would never be answered. Janice was too good a liar to give me a straight answer that I could believe. Well, Janice, this really sucks, and I'm sorry to bring you more bad news, but here are the divorce papers. It's all over between us. I wish I had a camera to capture the look on their faces when I said those words. It looked like something out of a bad comedy show with 3 open mouths and 6 bulging eyes. I will cherish this memory for many years to come. I walked out the door without saying another word. I climbed into my pickup truck and headed southeast. Janice was supposed to be formally served the paperwork the next day by someone from my lawyer's office. The copy I left her with the letter was just for my amusement. The letter said, "Janice, you lying slut. My lawyer will handle our divorce. I left you the house, but withdrew all our money from our accounts except for $3,000. You can pay your mortgage, bills, etc. After today, it's not my problem. I know that the children are not mine. I'll miss them, but I'll never be able to look at them without thinking about how you got pregnant. Maybe Henry could sell his ass in prison and help support his 2 offspring. It is in your best interest not to challenge the terms of your divorce. I would hate to think of your children having both parents in prison and being raised by your mother and Uncle Henry. Yes, I know that you were the one who gave Junior the information about when this nice old couple would leave the country. And if Henry doesn't give up on you, and if you don't agree to my terms, I will definitely call the police and tell them to check the records at your clinic to find out which nurse gave this couple the injections and question them about when they will leave. Trust me, I'll do it in no time, and I'll laugh while I make the call. Don't even think about trying to contact me in any way. From everything I've learned about you and your mother in the last month, I'd rather talk to a mad dog than hear your lying voice again. I would wish you good luck, but I would be lying. Go to hell, and tell that witch mother of yours that she can go there too. Simon. The second phase of my revenge was completed. The third stage would have taken longer, but it would have been so much fun if my plans had worked. Over the past month, I managed to acquire 2 colonies of termite ants. It's amazing what you can buy online. One day, while we were at Penny's house, I snuck down the stairs into her basement and planted 2 colonies in inconspicuous places. The ants will continue to make their way through the rafters and walls for the next few years until the logs are so rotten that the house is no longer salvageable. Penny is such a lousy housewife that she'll never notice. Did I forget to mention that I have been responsible for all of Penny's utility and household bills for the past 6 years? At the time, I paid every bill with a smile on my face because it was the least I could do for such a wonderful mother-in-law. The woman I considered my surrogate mother. This was before I found out that she was part of a plot to cuckold me. Now, since I was in charge of the bills, and since the house was not mortgaged, it was easy for me to cancel her homeowner's insurance, which I did that same month. No one will know anything until they try to claim damages from the ants. Phase 4. The Sicilians are right. The best revenge is served cold. At least that's how it was for me. When I left that day in my truck, I had all the clothes, money, tools, and personal items I would need to start a new life. I went to the Florida Keys, and Larry helped me sell my truck and buy a boat. It would take me several years to recover here in the Caribbean, but I had the resources to make it happen. I loaded my tools into my new used 10-man motorboat and headed out to the islands. I spent the next 3 years living on a boat and doing my best to find odd jobs, doing finishing work on various islands. One of my former clients, a Microsoft multimillionaire, bought a small island in the Bahamas, and I spent 4 months in his new home. I even decorated several interior spaces on 2 mega yachts owned by some Saudi princes. Here on the islands, everything is different. There are many working class or poor people, a small middle class, and a much smaller number of wealthy people. It took time, but my reputation began to strengthen among wealthy people on different islands. It helped that my living expenses were relatively low. After 3 years, more money began to come in than go out, and I had fun. Did you have sex with me? Hell yes. You'd have to be a leper not to come here. So many women come to the islands in search of a good time. Of course, many of these women want to enjoy their first native experience, but there are plenty of crumbs left for the white man's celebration. I still kept in touch with a few friends in Portland, especially Fred, who had since reconciled with his ex-wife. All my friends were given clear instructions not to tell Janice where I was or to give her my cell number. The second year after my elopement, I convinced Fred and his wife, Emily, to meet me in St. Martin for a week's vacation on my yacht. I was really looking forward to seeing my old friend. Imagine my complete shock when I pulled up to the dock to pick them up. Standing next to them was my ex-wife, Janice. She looked absolutely stunning. Now in her early 30s, she still had the body of a 20-year-old girl, and she wore a bikini top and a pair of Daisy Dukes to accentuate those features. I stopped the boat 15 meters from the dock and backed up to go another 30 meters. Before turning off the engine, my cell phone rang. It was Fred, of course. Fred, what the fuck? Why did you bring her here with you? Simon, it's not my fault. Janice was asking Emily for information about your whereabouts. When she found out about our trip, she forced Emily to take her with us. Emily told me that if I didn't agree, I wouldn't have sex for the next year. Well, Fred, you kept your end of the deal, so I'm glad you don't spend the next year dating your hand. But you won't set foot on my yacht this week. Sorry. I suggest either going home or, if you decide to stay, try a casino hotel. They are usually not booked at this time of year. Farewell. When I hung up, I heard screams from the pier. It looked like Emily and Janice were about to have a stroke. I called down to the galley. "Kelly, can you come up on deck?" Kelly was a young lady I met last year at a party thrown by my client, Microsoft. She teaches school in Florida and spent 3 weeks of her summer holiday island hopping with me, and need I say, she is drop-dead gorgeous. We were friends with benefits, and that's all we'll ever be. Someday she would definitely have become the wife of a millionaire, but she spent her 20s sowing wild oats. As Kelly started to walk up the ladder from the galley, I stopped her. "Baby, do you mind if you take off your top before you go on deck?" Kelly smiled mischievously as she took off her top. She was wearing my favorite bikini bottoms with a tiny triangle in the front and a thin stripe in the back. "Do you want me to take off my swimming trunks too?" "No, this is too much." Kelly walked up the ladder and stood on the deck. "Do you see those 3 people standing on the pier? Could you please wave to them?" And while Kelly stood and waved, her perfect tan breasts bouncing on her body, I started the engine and headed back out to sea. A week later, I received an email from Fred apologizing and saying he didn't blame me at all for what I had done. She and Emily spent a week on the island, but Janice flew home, spending the rest of that day in tears. So maybe I could consider this as a 4th step. And maybe after reading this scene you might think I'm done, but I'm not. Like I said, the best revenge is served cold. It was my 4th year in the Caribbean, and I was doing renovations in St. Bart's for a wealthy French couple. I know many Americans can't stand the French, but my experience has been very positive. I took the time to learn a little French, and my feeble attempts at conversation were appreciated by those I met. The job was supposed to take me at least a month, and the owners returned home after the first week. 2 days later, their daughter appeared. I just took one look at this woman, and my heart and mind just melted. I don't know what the French call it, but my Italian mother called it struck by thunder. Moreover, when this young lady was putting down her suitcases, she looked at me and smiled with both her lips and eyes. "Bonjour, Monsieur Messina. My parents warned me that you would be working here, but they assured me that everything would be fine as long as I didn't get in your way." I was close to answering that all I wanted in this world was for her to get in my way. "Sorry, mademoiselle. You are putting me at a disadvantage. You know my name, but I don't know yours. My parents didn't tell you that they were expecting me." "No, I'm afraid not." "Then please accept my apologies. I'm Simone. Just say the word and I'll rent a room in the city while you work. This won't cause much inconvenience." "Please, mademoiselle, do not hesitate to stay here. Your parents didn't mind staying in the house while I worked. That is, if the noise from my work doesn't bother you. I spent the night in the guest house, but I can return to my boat at the marina if you are uncomfortable. My parents told me that you are a polite person, and they would not have allowed me to come if they were worried about my safety. Please continue to use the guest house while you are here. In fact, I'd probably feel more comfortable knowing there was a gentleman nearby." The next few weeks were something of a dream. Simone is a classic French girl, at least in the films I've seen. Height is 160 centimeters. Small breasts fit perfectly on her slender figure, short black hair, and the face of Audrey Tautou. She moved with the grace of a dancer. I was head over heels in lust. And most importantly, she was a wonderful person. Even though she grew up in a wealthy family, there was no arrogance in her. Usually at noon I was greeted with lunch, which she prepared herself. She would join me on the patio and we would eat together. During our first lunch, we joked about the similarity of our names. Simone had a wonderful sense of humor, and I would try my best to make her smile or laugh just to see her happy face. I continued to lust, and by the end of the second week, I was in love. She broke the deadlock. "Simon, I see the way you look at me, and I'm sure I know what it means. I am also sure that you are aware of the difference in our positions in life, and I believe that is why you are keeping your distance. Let me tell you what I see. I see a wonderful man who achieved success despite unpleasant events in his life that were beyond his control. They didn't turn you into a bitter person. You are still looking for the joys of life. I know that I am beautiful and rich, but I haven't achieved much on my own. I try to be a good, kind-hearted person and think about myself. I ask, please do not consider yourself unworthy of me. Look at me as a woman who fell in love with a handsome man. How could I be so lucky? This incredible woman asked me to give her a chance. I didn't give her a chance to change her mind. I immediately pulled her into my arms and kissed her. We kissed for several minutes before she said, "Let's go to your room." We made love. We made love and we had sex. I took every opportunity, everything Janice had ever taught me about how to please a woman. I smiled as she screamed, "Oh my God," over and over again. This went on for several hours until we both fell asleep from exhaustion. The next morning, I woke up to Simone straddling me and looking down at me with her smile. She gave me the ultimate compliment. "Where did you learn to please a woman? You make love like a Frenchman." I could probably forget about it. I was so happy with my new life, but there was only one cartridge left in the Colt. 5 years after marrying Simone, 10 years after I separated from Janice, I mailed a photograph to Janice from our home in Paris. It was a photograph of me, Simone, and our 2 children. Yes, we went the route of artificial insemination, done the year before when we were visiting Simone's parents in St. Bart's. As always, Simone looked absolutely stunning in her bikini, while Jules and Juliette showed off their radiant smiles. The caption under the photo read, "Me, my wife, and my 2 wonderful children wish you a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. The 4th stage is completed. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one."